here can disabuse you of that notion because he has removed quite a few implants and he has examined them, has had them scientifically studied, as indeed I have in cooperation with Dr. Lear, and we very definitely have some extraordinary little objects that are being put in people's body. However, we're not going to talk too much about that today. We'll just get a sort of update on that. We're going to be talking about UFOs and Brazil. Roger Lear is also an expert on Brazilian ufology. He is a close friend of A.J. Gavard, who will be with us in the subscriber section as well today. He has a new book out, Roger does, UFO Crash in Brazil. It's available from the unknowncountry.com store. I believe it to be quite possibly one of the most important UFO books ever written, and the reason is that it contains some extraordinary wisdom from another world that has in a sense now been confirmed by the Brazilian government's admission that it does have secret UFO files. And Roger, why don't we begin by asking you, I think let's start with where you are in the world of implant research, and then we'll get into the Brazilian stuff in a few minutes.
Well, Whitley, kind of an exciting day today because I have two further cases that are pending as far as surgeries are concerned. And one of them has been sort of on the waiting list for a long time, waiting for funding. And as of yesterday, we've gotten some interest from the Discovery Channel, UK, who was interested in perhaps paying for all the expenses of the surgery. So, and also they're kind of anxious to have this done. So as far as I know, it's still on the planning stage, but we may be doing the 12th surgery. This is an individual has a very rich abduction history, and not only herself but also her family. And I have a very large file, even audio tapes that this lady's father made before he passed away, describing his experiences, both with sightings and other involvements with the field of ufology. So we're real excited today. I'm trying to run around and gather the data I need to present to the people. And we got my fingers crossed. We hope this will be done soon.
Oh, great. That's really exciting. Roger, can you tell us a little bit about what you generally find with the implants? I believe the last one, you even had some indications that it was broadcasting in the FM band before it was taken out of the person's neck, was it? Or hand?
Yeah, this one was in the cheek, Whitley, and that's absolutely correct. Because we were able to acquire a piece of equipment called a frequency lock, we were able to capture two radio frequencies from this individual. We were very careful in doing this because the atmosphere is sort of filled with all sorts of radio interference. So we took her to a remote area, and we just drew a circle on the ground, and then I stood in the center of the circle and turned the apparatus on and walked 360 degrees, pointing the antenna and making sure we locked onto nothing. Then we put the client in the middle of the circle and pointed the antenna from the receiver towards her, and lo and behold, it locked on an FM frequency. And then it stayed there for a short period of time, maybe 30 seconds, and then we lost it. We thought, oh my, this is probably some strange occurrence, maybe a harmonic or something. And suddenly, very shortly after that, it came back, but it locked on a different frequency. And at that point, we were really puzzled until we stood there long enough, and what would happen was this thing would oscillate from one frequency to the other, and then it would go back and forth. And that was very, very puzzling. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the object in her cheek was generating a radio frequency? Well, no. It's also possible that this device may be some kind of a relay device in which a signal is coming from somewhere else, and then it generates a harmonic or another frequency from that object itself. It could be any number of different things, but you're correct, because it was oscillating two different frequencies in the FM band.
That's absolutely fascinating, Roger. And tell us, what did the individual who had this in him experience? What was he reporting as his experience in life that might have been related to this thing?
She only had a couple of memories, and as you know, our surgical candidates, we don't allow them to undergo any regressive hypnosis, because essentially we want what we consider a clean case. And that's a case that has less criticism from outside factors. So we don't allow them to undergo any regressive hypnosis. Once the procedure has been done and the object has been removed, if they're interested in finding out more or enhancing their memory, we can provide someone who is qualified in doing hypnotic procedures on abductee cases. So her memories were just a couple with exposures to what she thinks were alien beings, and the usual story of seeing a very bright light filled her bedroom, and next thing you knew, she woke up in the morning and she had something in her cheek, but with no scar. She had just a little bit of discomfort there, and she actually didn't know about this until some years later when she went to the dentist. And the dentist examined her and took some x-rays, and he told her she had a piece of metal in her gum. And it was about that point where I came into the picture, because she couldn't figure out why she would have metal in the gum. She didn't have any dental surgery done. So she sent me all the x-rays, and she had quite a few. And we took them to our radiologist and dental consultants, and they advised having further x-rays. We took a Panorex, which goes all the way around the mouth, and could not really figure out exactly where this object was, and thought of all sorts of possibilities. We examined all kinds of dental metals that were used during dental procedures, but none of them sort of fit the bill radio density-wise. So we finally had a CAT scan done, and lo and behold, we found that the object was not in the gum at all. It was in the cheek. And not only was it in the cheek, but it was superficial to one of the muscle layers, which means that it didn't go in through the inside of the mouth. It went in through the outside of the cheek.
Good
and there
Lord.
was no scar.
And no scar.
No scar.
Roger, every time I hear one of these stories, it stuns me that this culture has rejected this as nonsense, because it's so obvious, so perfectly clear that there's something very bizarre going on here.
Well, I mentioned before Brazil, which happens to be one of my favorite places in the world, and probably a country with the most intense UFO activity ever. These things go on daily, and this new disclosure that AJ was privileged to participate in from the Brazilian Air Force is just one of the most monumental things that happened to all of mankind. And as you might predict, I didn't read about it in the New York Times or the LA Times, or I didn't hear about it on ABC, NBC, or CBS.
And yet this terribly important book came out virtually the week it happened.
Yes.
Is it an accident, or is there some larger force in control of this? I wondered that myself, Roger. When you told me about the book a few months ago, I thought, well, gee, it's great that he's bringing this out, because this is one of the most important of all UFO stories. Now, it's almost as if somebody somewhere is pointing straight at your book and saying, folks, listen up. It's just amazing that this coincidence has occurred.
Well, let's say modestly, and I'm not a braggart, and by nature a very modest patient. I never slap myself on the back.
I'll do your bragging for you. Don't worry.
I got a call from the publisher telling me that he's never had a book that sold with this amount of fervor, and that he was going to have to get in touch with the printer and have a lot more copies printed.
Right.
And yes, another synchronistic event. I mean, all this seemed to happen at the same time, and I just found out. I really didn't know too much of the details of what was released to AJ. They released 3 large files, and I knew that 2 of them, the 2 cases, one was a 1950s case, a 1977 case, but I did not realize that one of the things that AJ had asked for was material on the Varginha case, which is the subject of my book. And they did get some material on this case. So here is the Air Force, Brazilian Air Force, is corroborating the story of the Varginha case, even though the Air Force did not participate in the case. It was on the Army case, a different branch of the service. So I think that's really fantastic.
I think it is too, and we're going to find out a little bit more just in a few minutes about why it is so fantastic when we come back. This is Whitley Strieber. We're back. We're talking with Dr. Roger Leir about all manner of things, primarily his book, UFO Crash in Brazil, a genuine UFO crash with surviving ETs. This is probably going to turn out to be the best documented of all UFO crashes, because now there is a certain amount of corroboration from the Brazilian Air Force that this actually happened. Roger, can you tell us what document? Well, in fact, let me back up a little bit. Let's go over the Varginha case first, and tell us exactly what happened. And folks, during the course of this hour on Dreamland, you're going to hear a remarkable, truly remarkable message from the beyond that I think, personally, has been intentionally pointed to. Whatever's out there is pointing us at this book, at this story. So, Roger, tell us a little bit about what happened in Varginha first.
Well, it's a long story and a very involved case, and to capsulize it, I'll make every effort to do that. Of course, the complete story is in the book. But the accepted date of this occurrence was January the 20th of 1996. And the night of the January the 19th, a craft was seen flying around by a farmer, and it was getting closer to the ground. He described it as cylindrical, with a piece missing out of it, which was possibly the trailing end, the aft section. And smoke or vapor was pouring out of it. He watched it as it impacted with the ground, and shortly after it did that, he became alarmed, and he got closer with his truck. And in a very short time after that, the Brazilian Army was there with a load of trucks and manpower, and told him very strongly to get out of there. So he got in his truck, and he went away from the scene. But as Brazilians do, sometimes they don't all follow the directions that are given to them, as we are sometimes intimidated in doing in this country. And you got to remember that Brazil is a little bit different than the U.S. In many different ways. And one of the ways is that for many, many, many years they had a very jackbooted thug type of government. So the Brazilians were used to being threatened and so on. We're not. We have, if a military contingent told that to somebody here, we'd cave on our knees and run. But he didn't. So he pulled around the corner and watched the activity, and they gathered up all the material. A large piece that was left after the crash was described as about the size of a Volkswagen bus. And it was very heavy. The military had to bring in a crane to lift that piece and put it on the back of a truck. Then they combed out across the field close to each other with metal detectors and a lot of garbage bags, and filled the bags with debris. All the bags were loaded on the truck, as was the main piece, and all the material was then taken to a nearby Army military base called Sergeant's Camp. And this is a place where some of the military officers are trained. And it's not too far away from the site of the crash. Now, Varginha itself is a small town. It's about 120, 130,000 people, a farming town with cattle and coffee being their main industry. This is not a place where tourists go. It's in the state of Minas Gerais, which is a fairly big state in comparison to what we have here in the United States. And Varginha is, as I said, it's a small farming community, and people talk to each other. They all know each other, and very open sort of society. Well, as things went, the very next day, which was the 20th, at one time during the day, 3 girls who were on their way home from work, 3 young teenage girls, were taking a shortcut, and as they cut through this alleyway, they noticed what they thought was a child kneeling by a cement block wall. And they, as they approached, they realized that, it was a very strange-looking child. And they weren't all 3 abreast. They were sort of one behind the other. And then as the first girl arrived closer to the scene, she noticed that what was kneeling there was a very short being, less than 5 feet tall, brown skin, a very big red upturned eyes, very tiny little nose, no ears. The brown skin was kind of oily, and it had 3 protuberances, 3 bumps on the top of its head that went from the front to the back. And when she saw this, she thought it was the devil. And so she screamed, and she turned around and started to run. The second girl, in turn, looked at it. And when she looked at it, it turned its head and looked at her directly. And then she screamed and ran behind the other one. The third girl on the scene did the same. They all ran home and told their mother. The mother, in turn, went to a neighbor. The mother did not drive, didn't have a car, so she had the lady next door drive her back to the scene. But by the time she got back there, the creature was gone. Now, simultaneously, almost, within a few hours, there was another one of these beings, described the same way, that was picked up trying to cross the street. And in doing so, 2 military police officers, now this is not Army, this is the military police, 2 of them in a vehicle spied this entity trying to cross the street, and they pulled up and stopped one of them, a young 23-year-old, very healthy military officer, intelligence officer by the name of Marco Ila Shereze. Get out of the vehicle and approached this creature. The creature gave no resistance whatsoever. He put his arm around the creature, noticed that the being was injured. He took him back into the car and put him in the back seat on his lap. He was not gloved. He had no protective clothing. Both of them took the creature now to a small first aid-like station and took him in, and nothing could be done for him there, so they suggested that he take him to a hospital in downtown in Varginha called Hospital Regional. And Hospital Regional is a very good-sized community hospital. So he was taken there, and there were more military that were on the scene. Now, we'll let go of this portion of the story for the moment.
Right.
Because there were other events that also took place. That morning, another creature or creatures was seen trying to go down a small embankment and cross a field. there was a joint operation between the Brazilian military and the fire department. Now, the fire department in Brazil is not like what it is here in the U.S. The fire department is a military unit, and there was a joint effort between the fire department and Army military personnel who followed this creature down the hill, pursued it as it went into a grove of trees. There it was captured, placed in a sack. The men struggled, taking it back up the hill across railroad tracks, put it into a wooden container on the back of the truck, and took it also to sergeant's camp. In addition, there was another incident which occurred also that morning, and remember, there are many, many witnesses now, civilian and military witnesses that are involved in this case. 3 carpenters who were doing construction on a nearby rooftop, a house that they were building, watched as a Army military unit again crossed the same terrain and carrying weapons. They chased evidently one creature into this same grove, a thicket, and although it's not big and not deep like a forest, it's so thick that you really can't see from the outside. There, the witnesses say they heard gunshots, and shortly after that, 2 military personnel, Army personnel, came out of the thicket, one carrying a sack over his shoulder, and then another came out carrying a sack also. And in one of the sacks, movement was noted, and the other one, it was not. They were both taken back, loaded into vehicles, and away they went to Sergeant's Camp facility. Now, as I said, there's a number of witnesses. There's over 86 witnesses when I was there in 1990, in the year 2002, I think it was. And now there are a lot more witnesses. There are a lot more people involved. Now, to add mystery to the case, remember I told you about Marco Iacharese, the military police officer. Well, it so happens that within 3 weeks of the involvement with this being, this police officer was deceased and died a very strange, unknown death.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because I have something I'll add to that about my own personal experiences in this after you have described exactly what his symptoms were and how he was treated.
One of the individuals that I was privy to interview in my investigation of the case was the wife of this deceased military police officer. And her interview was most unusual. I have it on video. Now, when we did this, I had an interpreter who was speaking, back to me in English. Now, I asked this very nice lady, who barely smiled during the interview, a number of questions in relation to the symptoms of her husband, how long he was sick, and so on. She could not or would not answer any of these questions to any satisfaction whatsoever. Her answer basically was, I don't know. I asked her, what were the symptoms of your husband before he went to the hospital? I don't know. What were the symptoms of the husband when he was in the hospital? I don't know. After his death, were you privy to any of the medical records? No, they wouldn't let me see anything. Were you given a death certificate? No. I received absolutely nothing. And it went on like that until I asked her at the end of the interview, are you receiving any subsistence from the Brazilian military? Her answer was no. I said, are you receiving any subsistence whatsoever from any Brazilian branch of the Brazilian government? She said, no. I said, well, you're raising some small children. I said, how are you able to get by? And she said, I don't know. So,
wow, well, that was informative. Roger, we're going to have to take a little break. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're talking to Dr. Roger Leir, my dear friend. His new book, UFO Crash in Brazil, a genuine UFO crash with surviving ET. Stay tuned, folks, for the extraordinary message. Roger, before we go on, at this point, I would like to talk a little bit about, tell me the symptoms that the officer had before he died.
Okay, now the symptomatology originally came to me, strangely enough, from a British television production company who was there a year later and was able to interview Marco Iaicherezi's sister. And the symptoms that I heard at that time was that he had a high fever, pain in his back, his eyes were extremely red, bloodshot. He finally lost consciousness and passed away. Now, we had no information until August of last year, where there was a conference held in Varginha, the first ever, and another physician came forth, a physician by the name of Dr. Furtado. And Dr. Furtado came clean and talked about all the symptoms that the patient presented with. Now, some of these symptoms started with a furuncle or a small infected area under the armpit. Then he developed symptoms of a backache, and they thought it was a kidney infection. Then he had muscle aches and pains, high fever, and no matter what they gave him or diagnostic procedures that they did, they could not find the exact cause of what was making him sick. And as a result, he got worse and worse and worse until finally he expired. They ran numbers of blood tests. They took x-rays. They didn't find anything in his back. They didn't find anything wrong with the kidneys. They did find that there was a certain amount of toxic substance that was in the blood, and they felt that this was generated by a microorganism. They also found that his immune system was absolutely compromised, and they didn't know why. They ran tests for HIV, and they came back negative. They ran more than one, by the way. So at this point, all I can say is that he had a collapsed immune system. Also, the death certificate, after much to do, was finally produced, and under cause of death, it says unknown. Now, they're trying to exhume the body, but in my personal opinion, it ain't going to happen because I don't think there is a body. And I can give you my opinion of what this man died of.
That would be very interesting, Roger. Please do.
And to me, it looks like what is called a viremia, which is a virus that's circulating in the blood, attacking the body. Because one of the symptoms that I first heard about was the engorgement of the eyes with blood. And I think that from that and the other symptoms, putting two and two together, and the compromise of the immune system, which is documented, I believe that this was an infection with an Ebola-like virus.
So we are looking then at a situation where the man may have contracted it from his contact with this creature. Would that be a possibility?
Well, looking again at this whole situation, he wasn't exposed to anything. 3-4 weeks prior, he had no particular illnesses. They didn't go into any jungle environment. They weren't involved in any activities where he could have been exposed to something. Now, so,
Ebola is highly contagious. Did anyone else around him get sick?
At the time, we didn't think so, but now we are finding that there were other people who were also reported ill, both civilians and military. And AJ now and Ubirjar Rodriguez, who was the chief investigator of this case, trying to find out more information now about the illnesses, the related illnesses of these other people. Now, the reason I say there is no body is because if this is the case, both the Brazilian military and civilian authorities would certainly not want it known that there was an Ebola infection in Varginha. It would certainly panic the population.
Oh, of
so
course,
most
it would have
probably
been.
the
It would have
body-
been international news.
Oh yeah, well yeah. So most probably what they did was to cremate the body.
Cremated it to avoid any possibility of the whatever infection was spreading.
Right, not to particularly hide anything or to hide any evidence that he was exposed to a being from somewhere else, but simply to avoid the panic that would occur if it was noted that some Ebola-like organism infected this man and perhaps others.
Wow, incredible. Now, let me ask you this. Here we're looking at an apparently a man, he is intimately in contact with this being. He comes down with a bizarre and fatal illness. Now, if we went to another world, we would be making an effort to make sure that nobody came into direct physical contact with us. And yet these beings seem to have been just naked or clothed perhaps lightly on a roadside.
Well,
what's going on here?
But perhaps they were in a position that they were placed in by emergency. The description of the craft as it came down, in my opinion, it looks like the thing was shot down. Because one of the things that I didn't mention was that the Brazilian authorities, the military, were on the spot, seemingly ready, knowing this thing was going to come down. Later it was found out that our NORAD, advised the Brazilian government that something was coming down from space, and it pinpointed exactly where this was coming down and the time it was going to get there. So could have been shot down.
Wow. Shot down. Of course, we would have a hand in it. And folks, when you hear what was said, in other words, there was a doctor who actually had contact with one of these beings in a hospital. We're going to hear about that in just a moment. You realize that something does not compute here, in that we're shooting first and asking questions later. And it's beginning to sound like maybe the United States should be asking a few humble questions before taking pot shots. That maybe the U.S. government is really messing something up by what it's doing. And, Roger, one of the things I'm going to be discussing with AJ is the why of Brazil's change of policy, because, of course, every country in the world adheres religiously to U.S. policy in this area. Every country in the world, with a couple of exceptions, Chile being one of them, of course, that has genuine UFO information. And in general, the information out there is not very extensive, which is one of the problems, because what it is most countries, what they will reveal is that they do know it's a genuine mystery. But beyond that, there's only one or two countries, the U.S., probably Great Britain, possibly France, which can reveal more. But I'll be talking about that with AJ. Now, at this point in the conversation, where we want to go is to the hospital where the being was taken that was alive. Can you tell us?
Before we go there, I just want to make one quick comment.
Okay.
All people have been asking for years the classic question: why don't they land on the White House lawn? Well, this brings a very interesting side to this, because suppose they did land on the White House lawn and came out with and shook hands with a bunch of politicians, and then with 3 weeks they're all dropped dead.
That actually might really be great. In fact, I would encourage them to do that. I've got a whole bunch of politicians in mind that we could have in the assembly.
So the point is, perhaps they can't come down and make open contact unless there's a lot of preparation that goes on first.
Well, also, right now, we appear to be in a shooting war with them. And, when I had a lot of contact with them that I've never written about, because there's no point in it. I talk about it, and I have this website for people to explore their own experiences. But the general media is totally hostile to this, and is, in fact, the culture on this subject is not sane. And it's no point in talking to crazy people about something that it's just pointless. So I don't do it. However, it is quite clear that if we were in a position, if we had gone to another planet and found an intelligent species there that frantically brought every weapon to bear first without asking questions, we would be very hesitant to get close to them. Not only because it would be dangerous for us, but because it might even be more dangerous for them. And we'll find out what happened when somebody from another world and another reality did get close to a doctor in Brazil who Roger Leir has talked about personally when we return in just a moment, discussing his book UFO Crash in Brazil, a genuine UFO crash with surviving ETs. This thing is flying off the shelves, and you can get it from the unknowncountry.com store. Go to unknowncountry.com, click on that store tab. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. We're talking to Dr. Roger Leir. His book, UFO Crash in Brazil. Get it now from the unknowncountry.com store. Dr. Roger Leir has done a very thorough investigation of this, and if you think you're getting enough information from this discussion, think again. This book is richly detailed. It is full of illustrations of the people and events that took place. It is quite fascinating, but more importantly, it has a critically important chapter that you need to read and to have and to reread and to contemplate, because something happened there that we all need to take into our minds and hearts. Roger, tell us now what happened after this being was picked up by the military.
Okay, for our listeners, sit in your seats, listen carefully, and hold on to your hats, folks, because here it comes. Fortunately, when I arrived in Varginha, I was received very well. I received much more attention than I thought. The mayor came out to meet me at the plane, which I thought was rather extraordinary. But a number of individuals decided they would come forth and talk to me only. One was an orthopedic surgeon whose base in 1996 was Hospital Regional. And remember, this was the hospital where the creature was taken after leaving this first aid station. We met him at an office facility, and myself and Ubirajara Rodriguez and his son Rodolfo, and a very dear friend of mine who was doing my camera work at the time, Dr. Philip Serens, were the four people that were present. Initially, it was a very friendly meeting. He asked me if I would accompany him to see a patient, and I said I would be happy to. Now, he didn't speak any English, and I don't speak that much Portuguese, so I wondered how this was going to work out. But anyway, we went in, saw a patient who happened to have a fracture of one of the bones in the foot, and the doctor had the x-rays up on the view box, and I soon learned that we were able to converse with each other quite well, because medical language, I think, is international. I wound up helping or assisting him in putting on a cast. So a rapport was struck almost immediately. When we went back into this little consultation room, he would not allow any cameras or recording equipment. We had to promise him on our deathbeds that we would not divulge his name or mention this meeting for quite some time anywhere in Brazil. And I've kept this promise. His name is mentioned nowhere. You will never find it, and you will never get it. However, because I kept this promise, I think he would be more than happy to talk with me again. He started out by telling us a disclaimer that the things he was about to tell us he had no personal knowledge of, and that these were rumors that he had heard from his friends in the hospital. And what he told us was basically this: that night of January the 20th, he noticed a military presence in the hospital, but did not find this unusual. Because many cases there were military accidents that happened on the base, and they would bring the injured into the hospital, so he was used to seeing military there. However, as the night wore on, things became a little strange. For example, the military cordoned off a wing of the hospital, the maternity and surgical wing, and no one was allowed in or out. And he thought this was rather strange. And this occurred over a period of hours, you have to understand. Next, a military officer came out and called him by name and asked him to accompany him. They took him in to the surgical suite, asked him to put on his surgical garb, and to do a surgical procedure in a closed-off operating suite. And he asked what this was all about. He says, we can't tell you. You just go in and do your job. So he did the scrub and donned his gown, went into the room. There was nursing personnel there, and the doorway, which was a swinging door, as most operating rooms are, there was 2 military personnel that were on the outside of the door, and he was told, don't come out unless the job is done. He looked at the table and he saw covered with a drape sheet, a short, an individual that was short in stature, and thought, oh my, this is probably some child that has been injured, maybe from a military family. And then he looked at the view screen, and he had several X-rays that were on, and the one that he would look at, he saw that there was a compound fracture of the leg. He didn't really look at any details of the bone or saw any differences. It looked like a child with a compound fracture. So then he went to examine a patient, and the drape sheet was removed from, first of all, from the upper part of the body, and he looked into the face of this entity laying on the table and was thunderstruck because he knew it was not a child, it was not an animal, and he has a complete description he gave of the entity, less than 5 feet tall, excuse me, larger head, thin neck, very brown skin, which he said was very smooth but reticulated. And that means that if you looked at the skin, you would see things that looked like scales, but if you ran your hand over it, it would be perfectly smooth. There was no demarcation. The skin was a bit oily, brown in color. He had a set of external blood vessels which coursed up the shoulders, did not go into the neck. He has a small remnant of a nose, very small mouth, no visible ears. There was no hair anywhere on the body. He had 2 very large, upturned red eyes that the doctor described as 2 pools of liquid. The torso was quite small. The arms hung down lower than they would on the human being, and looked emaciated, very small musculature. The hands consisted of 4 fingers, no opposed thumb, but peculiarly enough, the creature could take each one of the fingers and articulate it with the other fingers, so it makes a perfect mechanical organ without the use of a thumb. And he didn't know whether this was because it was multi-jointed, he had no X-rays of the hands, or whether the fingers were composed of cartilage, which was bendable. Going down, there was no genitalia seen, there was no umbilicus. The thighs were quite muscular, much more so than the proportion to the upper extremity. The legs were relatively short, ended in 2 feet without apparent malleolar areas at the ankle, as we have. The feet had 3 large fleshy toes, no nails, no hair, and then 1 appendage that, in a relaxed position, hung down from the long axis of the foot. And when the creature would walk, he would pull this appendage up, and it would be parallel to the other toes and could walk much as we do. On the end of this appendage was a claw that was about 3/4 of an inch long. Now, he also described the blood. I asked him, was it blue, green, yellow? What color was the blood? And he said, no, it was just like ours. It was red. And I said, how about the micro consistency of the blood? And he said, also it was very similar to human blood. It had a liquid structure, a serum, and a cellular structure. And the cells, there were red and white cells, very similar to ours, but the platelet count was many-fold higher than what we have. I asked him to describe the bone. He said the bone was similar to ours. It was pink in color, covered with a membrane or periosteum, but it had large areas of what he called lacunae, or cavities in the bone, much like human osteoporotic bone, but in this case, it gave the bone a tensile strength that we said was 10 times over what human bone was.
I would like to discuss just briefly some of the communication between the doctor and this creature that is so extraordinary. And I don't want to go into it in too much detail here, because it's something I really feel that listeners, you should contemplate and read and reread. There is a point in the book where the doctor says there was an incident that happened, but I hesitate to tell you about it because it is so strange you might not believe me. Honestly, as a doctor, you will realize I am telling you nothing but the truth. Now, he then describes this green mist that came out of the creature, and then he talks about, I also want to tell you he downloaded a tremendous amount of knowledge into my head. And Roger, there were two things that are mentioned that about his race feeling so sorry for humanity. Why? What are these things, Roger?
Well, the two things that he was told is they felt sorry for human beings because, number one, human beings could do exactly what they could do. And one of the examples he gave was that wherever it is that they come from, they could either singularly or join together and heal. And it would not be necessary for him to be confined into a facility such as the one he was in to take care of his affliction. The other thing that he talked about was quite profound, and he said he felt sorry for human beings because we were totally detached from our spiritual self.
And this is part of a larger message which you will get in UFO Crash in Brazil, a genuine UFO crash for the surviving ETs. I really want you to have this message. I want you to have the whole story, because it is one of the key stories about the human condition, and a genuine, quite real message from another world. There's no point anymore in going through the dancing the dance of the skeptics, which, if you read their websites and so forth, you will soon find that most of them are atheists as well. This is not the human future. The human future has to do with reconnecting with the spirit. And if you think you're already in connection with your spirit, you are a little bit. But in order for all of us, for each of us to connect wholly, all of us must connect at least somewhat. We have to do this together. And that is why they are here. It is why this being died, not in that hospital, but ended up delivered into the hands of the U.S. military, where I am certain that he died a slow and agonizing death, alone, millions of miles from home, for us. For us. There are no accidents in this. There are no accidents. Roger Leir, I would thank you very deeply for being with us. His book, UFO Crash in Brazil, a genuine UFO crash with surviving ETs, by Dr. Roger Leir, available from the unknowncountry.com store. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you, Whitley.
Next up, Linda Moulton Howe with a stunner of a cattle mutilation story. You think you've heard it all before. You haven't heard this. Listen up. You're about to experience something you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the leading edge of science discovery and the true mysteries of the unknown. Don't miss her website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts that others dare not. earthfiles.com. This week she's reporting on over 3,000 animal mutilations reported since 2002 in Chile and Argentina. A fantastic number. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. And that's right, that number of unusual large animal deaths since 2002 in Argentina and Chile keeps climbing. I talked this week with Scott Corrales, editor and translator at Inexplicada, the journal of Spanish ufology. Scott received his master's in Spanish literature from Rutgers University, and his website, Inexplicada, provides Spanish to English translations about UFO-related incidents in Mexico, Central, and South America. Scott checked with Argentina researcher Raul Chavez, who has investigated cattle and other animal mutilations in the La Pampa province. Current totals for 2002 to 2005 in Argentina are 500 cases in 2002, 1,082 cases in 2003, 493 cases in 2004, and 75 so far this year in 2005. That's 2,150 animal mutilation reports, largely focused in the province of La Pampa, Argentina. Paralleling Argentina along the Andes Mountains is Chile, and there Scott Corrales has the statistic of 1,294 animal mutilations there since 2002. If you combine Argentina's and Chile's reported animal mutilations, the number is 3,244 in the past 3.5 years. And that's not counting the 1,461 poultry deaths in Chile caused by something out there that punctures the birds with bloodless holes. Bloodless punctures were the calling card of the infamous chupacabras creatures that attacked in Puerto Rico, Mexico, and the southern U.S. from 1995 to 1996. In addition, there were 837 mutilated and punctured animal reports on Brazil farms in 1997. Along with these thousands of unusual animal deaths, Chile and Argentina eyewitnesses have also seen unidentified aerial craft and beams of light, despite the Argentina government's official explanation for all the animal deaths, a red-snouted mouse.
The mutilations continued, despite the fact that the government, given the economic crisis, given all the political instability in Argentina at the time, had told the newspapers, we have already told you that the culprit is the red-muzzled mouse.
Red-snouted mouse, yeah.
And if you guys continue to alarm the public, we're going to accuse you of being alarmists, and any uprising, mutiny, or mayhem is going to be on your heads. So the print media, Clarín, La Razón, the major newspapers, all backed down from reporting. So it became a provincial newspaper and a web newspaper story.
Yeah.
And after that, and I'm talking about August or September 2002, the police were told not to accept any more reports or complaints about animal mutilation. So farmers, knowing that no one was paying any attention, simply kept the information to themselves or shared it with members of the mutilation research community.
Right.
By and large. And that goes on to this day.
Exactly. And this also underscores that the Buenos Aires reporter had gone out into one of the provinces to talk with a veterinarian specifically for me after SENASA made that very strange announcement that this red-snouted mouse was responsible for more than 1,000 of these animal deaths. And the veterinarian in the translation, he laughed
And he said, we don't even have the red-snouted mouse in this province.
That's right. That's right. Well, but you can imagine how outrageous it was that when the mutilations moved over to Uruguay across the River Plate, their medical examiners simply said, oh, blame it on the hornets. The hornets are the cause of the mutilation. And that was simply the answer that satisfied, and not a single word was said again about what was going on the Uruguay side of the river. Hornets responsible for mutilations, asked no further questions, pay no attention to the strange lights that are going back and forth in the night sky. And the most recent activity happens to be in a wilderness area called La Araña, the spider.
Right.
And even as of just a couple of days ago, they're still getting fascinating cases. They have 400-kilogram cows found dead, missing their udders or left eye and its tongue. One of the other victims was a horse, showing an incision on its lower jaw, missing its tongue, missing its ears, absence of hide, flesh mass, and muscles. And the most interesting thing, there were signs of microwave radiation present.
Oh?
And now, could this be from the instrument that was used in the removal procedure or from some other unknown source? We don't know. He certainly doesn't know.
How did they describe the evidence that they linked to microwaves?
Let's see. I have it right here. He says, part of the horse... I'm reading from Mr. Chavez's report.
Mm-hmm.
The report reads, part of the horse's hide was also seen missing from the right wither to the leg, and from the back to the belly, as well as a lack of muscles and flesh on the front of its left leg. The animal, while lying on its left side, presented signs of having been mutilated on both sides of its body. It also presented advanced signs of deterioration, being practically desiccated. This may suppose the existence of some type of radiation or microwaves at play. The report continues. According to the animal's owner, their deaths occurred some 15 to 20 days ago. Remains of the horse's mane, separated from the body, were also found. There were no tracks or traces suggesting the involvement of carrion animals. As in other cases, this could be due to the presence of radiation on the carcass. End of report. Something is going on. And coupled with the fact that in 180 incidents of cattle mutilations in 2002, unidentified lights were reported. The fact that something is coming down from above, whether lighting the terrain or shooting down this energy of whatever nature it happens to be, is a crucial part of the phenomenon, has to be studied with it.
You cannot dismiss this body of eyewitnesses in the United States, in South America, and wherever they have occurred. We're dealing with some kind of a technology that can pick up and lower 2,200-pound bulls.
The procedure, shall we call it, by which the animals are hoisted or lowered up along the beam of light. It took me back to the 2002 incidents in Santa Rosa and in southern Argentina, where 19 cattle were found inside a water tank, having been somehow taken from their pen and deposited inside this open water tank. Some of them were found drowned, some of them were found dying, as I recall. And even this is probably the most outrageous of the Argentine cases. And we had Alicia Rossi, another woman who's attached to Explicada, who actually tried to ask some questions. The farmer could say nothing more than, look, this is what happened. I have no other explanations. Someone took my animals and put them inside the tank. By whatever means, he had no idea. He couldn't tell. And if you look back to 1973, when they were having UFO activity in Wales, in the United Kingdom, there was a case where a herd, I think, was teleported, and let's use the word teleported, from its pen to another location, down a road, to another pen. There was something to that effect. So the power of this force, this beam, or whatever energy, to, as I guess, a Star Trek-like tractor beam, It's so funny how we end up resorting to science fiction for terms of reference sometimes. Seems to actually be standard technology in all these cases, reported in a number of countries, and certainly the effects appear to be the same. Everyone appears to agree that the mutilations do not take place on the ground, they take place elsewhere, and the animal is simply deposited back on Earth, either at the right location or at a certain distance from where the animal was collected.
Of all of the cases in 2005, from whichever country, what is the single most dramatic episode that you have translated concerning possibly entities in craft?
I think that a case that we just posted this past weekend to the Internet seems to be the most compelling. It's a case from Argentina involving a man who was returning to his ranch after a family event on a muleback. And he's crossing a river that he describes as being not a very deep river, but a very wide river, and seeing strange lights downriver. And he sees the lights, having been accustomed to seeing them before, having tied them in with the animal, the cattle mutilations in La Pampa province. And he decided that it was time for him to spur that mule and cross that river as quickly as he could. But at some point, the mule got frightened. He fell into the river as these three large disc-shaped objects passed directly over him, scanning the ground with their beams, giving him the distinct impression they were looking for something. They pass him over, keep going upriver, and he sees them, I guess, fade away at some point. But these objects, these saucers or lights or whatever you want to call them, structures, were distinctly looking for something. And it could have been a certain animal, it could have been a certain herd. That's just my conjecture. But that's the impression the witness was trying to convey.
That whatever was in those discs might have been actively looking for specific animals.
Absolutely.
To interact.
Whether it was one of his or one of those of a neighboring farm, he doesn't know. This man had, I think, lost, I'm trying to think, he lost an unspecified number of animals already. And even though it was just a very, very brief report, you could detect the sense of, I'm not going to say hopelessness, but why even bother reporting anything to the authorities? Nothing gets done. The police will, unlike the Puerto Rican police in Chupacabra's years, they would dutifully fill out police complaints and take reports and file them. But there was nothing to be done in Argentina, certainly. Right. After the government had handed down the instruction, do not report this, we have already given you an answer. And yet, like Galileo said, por si move, it's still happening.
Right.
The mutilations continue. The craft appear. Now, last month, there was a case that was straight out of the 1970s of two fellows driving along in a car, and they actually see beings, one of them descending along what they describe as a tube of light. And if there had been more information to that case, that would have certainly been the jewel in the crown for 2005. But they were driving past very quickly. They saw the object, saw the tube of light, saw one being on the ground and one being coming down the light beam. And they poured on the gas and just got out of there. Certainly, if they had more information, had someone stopped. Then again, who's brave enough in these cases, as I always ask myself, to actually pull over and have a closer look? I don't think that human response to external stimulus works like that in these cases.
I'm curious. I want to know. I want to see this up close. Where exactly, can you spell the nearest town where the beam and the two men were?
Santa Rosa, the town of Santa Rosa. S-A-N-T-A, Rosa, R-O-S-A.
And that's in Argentina.
That's in Argentina.
And I know that's on
La Pampa province.
Yeah, in La Pampa, and it's one of my. I have a map that I did when the mutilation activity was so heavy before SENASA's crazy announcement, and there are repeated places on that map. And it sounds to me like that we're describing the same areas now as I was when we were doing the mutilation activity.
Absolutely. The 75 cases for the year 2005 that Mr. Chavez mentions are all from his area, from La Pampa. Whatever's going on in that area, likes it, has taken an interest in, I guess, the genetic bloodlines of the cattle, doing genetic follow-up on whatever is going on there. There is a reason why the phenomenon is attracted to that part of Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
And if you notice, one of the interesting cases of the cattle mutilation epidemic in 2002, had nothing to do with mutilations. It had to do with water. The fact that throughout Santa Rosa and its surrounding communities, swimming pools and water tanks were being systematically emptied of water.
Right.
And then, after we mentioned these things and we tied them in to cases involving UFOs seen drawing water from ponds and lakes and stateside and other cases, there was the oddest thing. But the Montel Williams show featured a segment with psychic Sylvia Brown, in which one of the people asking Sylvia Brown for an answer to a mystery was a person from, I think, the U.S. South. I'm not sure if she was from the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, who suddenly woke up one day to find her pool completely drained, no cracks, no spilled water around the pool, and Sylvia Brown tells her, "Oh, honey, those were aliens." And, of course, the way it's said on American television is so folksy.
Yeah.
But when you think back 2 years earlier to what was going on in Argentina, pools, water tanks, anything that could hold water being drained,
right,
with no evidence of leakage. It's mind-blowing.
And the host didn't say to Sylvia Brown, "What aliens are you talking about?"
Not that I recall. I think that it was just sort of, it all dissolved into laughter, more or less.
Well, your point is a good one, that the phenomenon that has been occurring in repeated cases in South America and is not reported here at all, and then if something happens in North America, it's dismissed with sarcasm.
Exactly. It becomes purely entertainment. And there's valuable information here. There's material to be collected. There are interviews, in-depth interviews to be performed. There's analyses to be performed of whatever residual water was in those water tanks. It's not being done.
Right.
And all that we have from Argentina from that year was work being performed by the defunct, I forget what the group was called, UFO group. And a journalist named Kike Mba, who had been a political journalist during, I think, the years of that disappeared, and had now taken interest in UFOs now in more recent times. And he was hot on the trail of all the absconded water, so to speak. And the more he asked around, the more questions, the more leads he followed, the more cases emerged of people who were either too afraid to mention anything, or had just said, well, I guess there must have been a crack, a leak, there must have been something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
that these emptied swimming pools could be a large number for reasons that are not comprehensible.
Exactly. And, of course, then again, you wind up with the case from 2002 of why did the 19 head of cattle wind up inside a water tank?
Exactly. As if they were dropped.
Exactly. Was it someone asleep at the controls, or that's really what came to my mind. It was, someone probably got a reprimand for doing that.
Or we are dealing with something that has a perverse sense of humor, and that they would do this in a South American land, saying no one will figure this out.
Well, exactly. This is, I'm so glad to hear you say that. That's what some our mutual colleague Peter Jordan was working with psychics with some of the photographs, a psychometrist rather, doing some of the work with chupacabras in Puerto Rico, based on photographs provided to us by Willy Durand and the Puerto Rican Research Group. And one of the psychometrists said that whatever's doing this delights in confusing humans.
Right.
He says he saw the mutilations, he saw the blood, the horror, and the only thing was joy, incredible joy at whatever's behind this. Loves to mystify, takes great, great delight in seeing humans going crazy, much like we're amused by one of our household cats trying to follow a laser beam on the wall.
Right.
They go nuts. They have no idea what it is. And we take, hopefully we don't take perverse pleasure in it, but it certainly we do find it amusing.
Yeah.
And it ties in again with a little flexero, saying that we are a human farm. We are here for the entertainment, the enjoyment of what he calls the gods.
And that amusement might have been what happened when Scott Corrales mentioned the transportation of a herd of cattle in England. It's worth going back to that book that detailed this event. It was called The Dice-Fed Enigma, Unidentified Flying Objects in West Wales, copyrighted in 1979 by Randall Jones Pugh and F.W. Holliday. The authors interviewed farmer Billy Coombs at his farm in the Ripperston Broadmoor region of Wales. There, the researchers learned that in April to May of 1977, quote, a herd of some 100 cattle had escaped during the night about half a dozen times. On these occasions, the entire herd had apparently slipped silently past the house, gone down the lane, then turned down a side road to end up at Broadmoor Farm half a mile away, unquote. When Mr. Coombs was asked by the authors how this could have happened, he answered, quote, they must have flew there, unquote, and the gate was still locked. All of the times the gates were still locked. The 100 cattle herd was mysteriously transported in the night, though several times to the great frustration of the Billy Coombs family, and there never was an explanation for the repeated cattle herd teleporting. But at the time, there were constant reports of unidentified aerial objects and tall beings dressed in tight-fitting silver suits seen by many people walking around in various fields. And I guess, Whitley, teleporting whole herds of cattle could be for something's amusement. What do you think?
Linda, I don't think it's particularly amusing. I must say, I find it... I found, by the way, one of the best cattle mutilation reports I've ever heard just now. I was amazed by it. And
thank you.
You know what is most disturbing is that the evidence is overwhelming. It's completely undeniable. And yet there still continues this process of denial, and you just have to wonder why.
And especially in Argentina, where I was interviewing through a Buenos Aires English-speaking reporter with veterinarians in the field in La Pampa near Santa Rosa in 2002 to 2003 when they were having so many mutilations every day. And he was talking to veterinarians for me, and the veterinarians were telling me through the Buenos Aires reporter, we're dealing with something that is cauterizing the excisions. There's no blood. And when SENASA, the Argentinian version of our Department of Agriculture, put out an order that the explanation, it was done as if this is the answer and no one is to argue that it was this small red-snouted mouse, the veterinarians were really upset. It sort of enraged them because one man said privately to the reporter, he said, they're insulting our intelligence. And that one vet said, there aren't no red-snouted mouse in this province. And how could the mouse, the red-snouted mouse, have been responsible for now 3,200 and some mutilations in 2 countries, and red-snouted mice aren't going to put 19 cattle up inside of a tall water tank. Again, this happened and is was factual. It was reported upon. It happened. How in the world did 19 animals get up in that water tank if something didn't drop them in there from the sky?
Well, Linda, we are going to have to stop with that question because I can't answer it, you can't answer it. But one thing it kind of does tell us, this isn't the U.S. military out testing cattle because they might have mad cow disease or something. This is something very, very much stranger, which I have always thought was probably the case. Linda, thank you very, very much for this report. Obvious, so perfectly clear that there's something very bizarre going on here.
Well, I mentioned before Brazil, which happens to be one of my favorite places in the world and probably a country with the most intense UFO activity ever. These things go on daily, and this new disclosure that AJ was privileged to participate in from the Brazilian Air Force is just one of the most monumental things that happened to all of mankind. And as you might predict, I didn't read about it in the New York Times or the LA Times, or I didn't hear about it on ABC, NBC, or CBS.
And yet this terribly important book came out virtually the week it happened.
Yes.
Is it an accident, or is there some larger force in control of this? I wondered that myself, Roger. When you told me about the book a few months ago, I thought, well, gee, it's great that he's bringing this out because this is one of the most important of all UFO stories. Now, it's almost as if somebody somewhere is pointing straight at your book and saying, folks, listen up. It's just amazing that this coincidence has occurred.
Well, let's say modestly, and I'm not a braggart, and by nature a very modest patient. I never slap myself on the back.
I'll do your bragging for you. Don't worry.
I got a call from the publisher telling me that he's never had a book that sold with this amount of fervor, and that he was going to have to get in touch with the printer and have a lot more copies printed.
Right.
And yes, another synchronistic event. I mean, all this seemed to happen at the same time. And I just found out, I really didn't know too much of the details of what was released to AJ. They released 3 large files, and I knew that 2 of them both surgery. This is an individual has a very rich abduction history, and not only herself but also her family. And I have a very large file, even audio tapes that this lady's father made before he passed away, describing his experiences, both with sightings and other involvements with the field of ufology. So we're real excited today. I'm trying to run around and gather the data I need to present to the people. And we got my fingers crossed. We hope this will be done soon.
Oh, great. That's really exciting. Roger, can you tell us a little bit about what you generally find with the implants? I believe the last one, you even had some indications that it was broadcasting in the FM band before it was taken out of the person's neck, was it? Or hand?
Yeah, this one was in the cheek, Whitley, and that's absolutely correct. Because we were able to acquire a piece of equipment called a frequency lock, we were able to capture 2 radio frequencies from this individual. We were very careful in doing this because the atmosphere is sort of filled with all sorts of radio interference. So we took her to a remote area, and we just drew a circle on the ground, and then I stood in the center of the circle and turned the apparatus on and walked 360 degrees, pointing the antenna and making sure we locked onto nothing. Then we put the client in the middle of the circle and pointed the antenna from the receiver towards her, and lo and behold,
here can disabuse you of that notion because he has removed quite a few implants and he has examined them, has had them scientifically studied, as indeed I have, in cooperation with Dr. Lear, and we very definitely have some extraordinary little objects that are being put in people's body. However, we're not going to talk too much about that today. We'll just get a sort of update on that. We're going to be talking about UFOs and Brazil. Roger Lear is also an expert on Brazilian ufology. He is a close friend of A.J. Gavard, who will be with us in the subscriber section as well today. He has a new book out, Roger does, UFO Crash in Brazil. It's available from the unknowncountry.com store. I believe it to be quite possibly one of the most important UFO books ever written, and the reason is that it contains some extraordinary wisdom from another world that has, in a sense, now been confirmed by the Brazilian government's admission that it does have secret UFO files. And, Roger, why don't we begin by asking you, I think let's start with where you are in the world of implant research, and then we'll get into the Brazilian stuff in a few minutes.
Well, Whitley, kind of an exciting day today because I have two further cases that are pending as far as surgeries are concerned. And one of them has been sort of on the waiting list for a long time, waiting for funding. And as of yesterday, we've gotten some interest from the Discovery Channel, UK, who was interested in perhaps paying for all the expenses of the surgery. So, and also they're kind of anxious to have this done. So as far as I know, it's still on the planning stage, but we may be doing the someone who is qualified in doing hypnotic procedures on abductee cases. So her memories were just a couple with exposures to what she thinks were alien beings, and the usual story of seeing a very bright light filled her bedroom, and next thing you knew, she woke up in the morning and she had something in her cheek, but with no scar. She had just a little bit of discomfort there, and she actually didn't know about this until some years later when she went to the dentist. And the dentist examined her and took some x-rays, and he told her she had a piece of metal in her gum. And it was about that point where I came into the picture because she couldn't figure out why she would have metal in the gum. She didn't have any dental surgery done. So she sent me all the x-rays, and she had quite a few. And we took them to our radiologist and dental consultants, and they advised having further x-rays. We took a Panorex, which goes all the way around the mouth, and could not really figure out exactly where this object was, and thought of all sorts of possibilities. We examined all kinds of dental metals that were used during dental procedures, but none of them sort of fit the bill radio density-wise. So we finally had a CAT scan done, and lo and behold, we found that the object was not in the gum at all. It was in the cheek. And not only was it in the cheek, but it was superficial to one of the muscle layers, which means that it didn't go in through the inside of the mouth. It went in through the outside of the cheek.
Good
and there
Lord.
was no scar.
And no scar.
No scar.
Roger, every time I hear one of these stories, it stuns me that this culture has rejected this as nonsense because it's so
locked on an FM frequency, and then it stayed there for a short period of time, maybe 30 seconds, and then we lost it. We thought, oh my, this is probably some strange occurrence, maybe a harmonic or something. And suddenly, very shortly after that, it came back, but it locked on a different frequency. And at that point, we were really puzzled until we stood there long enough. And what would happen was this thing would oscillate from one frequency to the other, and then it would go back and forth. And that was very, very puzzling. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the object in her cheek was generating a radio frequency? Well, no. It's also possible that this device may be some kind of a relay device in which a signal is coming from somewhere else, and then it generates a harmonic or another frequency from that object itself. Could be any number of different things, but you're correct, because it was oscillating two different frequencies in the FM band.
That's absolutely fascinating, Roger. And tell us, what did the individual who had this in him experience? What was he reporting as his experience in life that might have been related to this thing?
She only had a couple of memories, and as you know, our surgical candidates, we don't allow them to undergo any regressive hypnosis, because essentially we want what we consider a clean case. And that's a case that has less criticism from outside factors. So we don't allow them to undergo any regressive hypnosis. Once the procedure has been done and the object has been removed, if they're interested in finding out more or enhancing their memory, we can provide